Two, one. Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Alex Gortney, and welcome to the Developer Soup Podcast. As always, I brought on my partner, Nick Queen. We also brought on a guest, David. How do you pronounce your name again? Last name? I don't
Rail,
want Rail. Okay, sorry, I didn't want to mispronounce that there.
no
He is
problem.
a .NET developer, a podcaster on the Developer on Fire podcast, and is also a blogger. So, with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and let him take the floor and go ahead and introduce himself.
So I'm Dave Rail, and I've been doing software since 2008, I guess it is 2008 or 2009. So it's been a long time, and I got into doing software after I went to school for physics, and I did some workshops. I did some tutoring in college for kind of freshman and sophomore physics classes, and really decided that teaching was something that really did it for me, something I really liked doing. So I took some teaching license classes after that. I was going to become a high school physics teacher, and I wound up getting a job because they wanted me to not have a job while I was doing student teaching. So I decided to get a job, and at that time, this was kind of in the height of the dot-com boom, and so I got a job writing software. And it's kind of interesting that it hadn't ever occurred to me before that software was really my thing. But looking back on it, in college and in high school and some of that stuff, some of my favorite things to do was writing code to solve problems and do simulations in physics classes and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny that I ultimately wound up back in software, and it never really occurred to me before that was a path I was going to go down. So software wound up being something that I just really got a big charge out of, and started out doing an application that was C++ on the server, and there was this Visual Basic 6 client that was dealing with that thing, and so that was kind of my introduction to the Microsoft stack, and I wound up doing mostly that for most of my career, and it's not exclusive. I've dabbled in some other things, Java, Ruby on Rails, and JavaScript. So currently, I'm doing some work with GitHub on working on the Atom editor, and so I'm getting exposed to Node and CoffeeScript and some other of that kind of neat stuff. And Electron is really a cool thing, and so doing some learning about doing desktop applications in HTML and JavaScript, and just having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. That's such a weird, I would say, a weird jump. But I'm just curious, when you were doing physics, where was it you started to like I guess get like really introduced to software in general? Like, where did you start learning it from?
Well, it's kind of funny because I took a Fortran class in college. That was kind of and I went to a school that was very focused on engineering, so it was kind of everybody takes a programming class. So I took a Fortran class, and I did in high school I took a Pascal class. So I'd been exposed to writing software, and I had kind of stumbled upon BASIC when I was a kid. So I'd done a little bit of coding here and there in physics, and I actually had a minor in electrical engineering as well. There was also a
Wow.
lot of kind of digital circuit kind of stuff in both of those departments. So I had a minor in electrical engineering, and so I was exposed to some of those things, and then C was kind of the thing that we did in physics. We'd do kind of planetary, orbital motion kinds of simulations and stuff, and different kinds of things, and then kind of some controlling robots and some, well, not necessarily robots, but motors and some things, kind of some building blocks for robotics. I didn't really get into robotics, beyond controlling motors and doing some feedback systems and stuff like that. So using C to interface with some of those things was kind of a part of it too. And then there was in electrical engineering, did some evaluation boards, wrote some assembly code for some evaluation boards and stuff like that. So I had been exposed to doing some coding. Now, I mean, that was a very far cry from doing professional software development. In fact, when I decided that I was going to get a job, and my cousin just kind of put in my name with her manager for somebody who had been exposed to code, and when people were desperate for developers, I
Mhm.
went in there to an interview to try to become a junior developer, and I distinctly remember being asked some question about a relational database, and I was like, well, what is a relational database, right? So it was, I had been exposed to being able to write a little bit of code, but professional enterprise development was something that I completely learned on the job.
Yeah, and I think that's something that probably your kind of thing. You kind of touched on something that I found interesting too, as well. Just going from, I think it was before I got interviewed on your podcast. I got into just a very basic screen interview, and they had asked me some questions that the only way you're gonna really run into them is either you've been asked them or you've done some actual on-the-job training with, like you said, with an actual enterprise stuff. But the good thing about that, though, is being exposed to that, though, I think helps later on when you go into future interviews because it allows you to start looking stuff up. Um, but I think that's something that, honestly, that when you're learning software, I think it's something that a lot of places need to start changing is getting more, teaching the more of how it works in a real business rather than on as much as they can rather than just hobbying type stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think
That
you
way you
might be
don't run
talking.
into that. Go ahead.
I think you might be talking a little bit about schools, right? I mean, school versus the enterprise environment. The businesses aren't going to be in a position of teaching you anything in the interview. So if I understood you correctly, I mean, schools, I mean, it's not really necessarily hobby stuff that the schools are teaching, but it's more kind of computer science stuff generally. And a lot of times with kind of more scientific kinds of languages and things like that, and not necessarily the cutting edge languages that are being used in real enterprise development. So yes, there's definitely a chasm between where schools are and where enterprise businesses are, and I think that's a big part of why this boot camp phenomenon has really taken off, is because it is so much more focused on what you really need to do versus a computer science education that's not necessarily. There's a lot of things in computer science that actually do apply to actually doing things in software, but it's definitely a different focus, and academia has kind of a different spin on things, and it's not necessarily directly applicable in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think something that I found that's kind of interesting is the reason I brought this up too is because I was sitting in my class earlier today and I was just discussing something just that it was just I was just bringing up something about Bootstrap and the other frameworks that you can use for CSS, and but because nowhere in my books or anything they even remotely mention anything about a framework or the outside stuff or past just like the minimal amount of information that they can give you to get you started, I should say. And it was interesting to see how many of these people that when they saw me post that, it was just like opening this gigantic door to them. And it was like, holy cow, it showed them how much they don't actually know. And it just like you said, the reason the boot camps become a bigger and bigger thing. And honestly, I'm waiting for it to either transition to where the code industry, you either just go to a boot camp or colleges start moving their stuff to a more boot camp geared curriculum in code. But it's something that go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to kind of agree with that, except that there's also, the schools have a reason for teaching computer science stuff as well, right? Learning about compilers and operating systems and being able to build those things, and learning fundamental algorithms and some of the history of computer science and a lot of those kinds of things. Those have a lot of value, and they don't necessarily directly translate to those things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis as a professional software developer. And so the boot camps really have something to offer. And I would say too that college is not necessarily for everybody. Is kind of another, I start to get a little bit philosophical and political if I start talking about some of that stuff, but there seems to be a big push toward everybody should have a college education, and I just don't necessarily buy that.
I'm
computer
with you on that.
scientists. there's a place for computer scientists and there's a place for professional developers, and they don't necessarily need the same training. Although, a lot of the things that I learned in school, and I got a master's in computer science later, so I didn't actually do computer science in my undergraduate degree, but after I'd been doing software engineering for a while, I decided to go and get a master's degree, and so I did kind of get that experience of computer science in the academic setting. And a lot of the stuff that you learn there about asymptotic analysis and some of those things, and data structures and as well, and algorithms and all of that kind of stuff, it may not necessarily be directly applicable to the things that you're doing, but having a working knowledge, especially about asymptotic analysis and really, the big O notation, and understanding the complexity of the algorithms that you're writing, really do help you to understand kind of how you're going to deal at scale with your solutions to certain things. And it's something that is good to have kind of in your quiver and be able to speak knowledgeably about that stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think so? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna say real quick. I honestly do think too it depends on the school you go to on what they teach, because some of the stuff you mentioned, it depends on the degree that you're in. Because like in my associate's degree, they're not gonna be teaching high level stuff until you get to your bachelor's. But I just noticed a difference between like some of the like our last guest we had on, Tiffany. She was doing Java in her stuff, and her classes were a lot longer, so they're able to teach a more in-depth stuff versus where when I go online, they only have 5 weeks to teach you a certain amount of stuff, so they're going to teach like condensed versions of it. So I also think too it's up to certain people to go out and explore more of it outside the classroom as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, there's definitely a different focus in different places, and I can't speak too much to what different schools are like and some of those things like that. I went to kind of a commuter school that was kind of after work. I kind of showed up and went there, and I think some of the instructors I had were great, and some of them were not so great. And all in all, I don't think that the price of a college education is delivering value that is that is on par with that. I think really you're paying a lot more than you're getting out of it if you are paying yourself. Now, I went to college on scholarships, and then later my employer was paying for me to go and get my master's, so it wasn't a cost directly to me. But if I was footing the bill myself, I don't think it would be worth it, and I think there are a lot better ways to learn.
Yeah, see that's where I'm at myself, because I have to pay for it out of my financial aid, and then something I got to pay later on, and like that's something I've been bringing up to a lot of people. Is like I felt that going through a program like Free Code, or not Free Code Camp, but Code Oregon, that was offered through Treehouse, where people that live in Oregon can get Treehouse for free. I felt that I got more out of that curriculum than I did college. Out of the almost 2 years I've been in there right now, just doing basic programming classes. But again, that's just my opinion. I mean, it's just also because I did a lot of outside research before I went into college. So it was one of those things to where I already had the door opened to me and exposed to several different things. So when I was seeing what they were teaching in college, it was kind of like, all right, they're really not opening up broader ideas to people. They're kind of like closing them in. But again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it really is a different emphasis than trying to build a career as a software developer. The professors there are computer scientists, and well, not exclusively, I'm sure. It probably depends on the school and a lot of things like that, like you said. But yeah, it's they're there for the science and the research and all of those kinds of things. It probably typically, and it's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, Nick, what were you gonna say earlier? Before I cut you off.
Sorry, that's okay. I was just gonna say, would you say that might be a point? I mean, first off, going back to boot camps, my biggest issue with boot camps are that a lot of them are really intense, which is kind of what a boot camp should be. But also, a lot of people are going to be left out because like someone in my situation, I'm not able to take 2 or 3 months off of work, move to San Francisco or wherever. I'm kind of close to DC. I guess I could go down there, but a lot of people aren't able to do that. I mean, they have to have a substantial amount of savings, or be able to go into debt to do it. So I think that's one of the reasons college, a lot of times you can usually work. I mean, I worked full time when I went to college, for my first degrees. So, I think that's one of the reasons people go the college route. But secondly, do you think, my question, do you think there's a time when someone should consider, let's say they go the boot camp route or whatever, and then is there a time they should consider maybe going back to get the computer science part, or do you think that that's not necessarily something you really need and something you just kind of picked up because somebody else was paying for it and it might help fill out your resume?
Well, in my situation, my intent for getting a master's in computer science was that I had this idea in my mind that I wanted to, going back to that teaching thing, I had kind of abandoned my dream, not necessarily dream, but my intent of being a high school physics teacher because I decided that I really, really liked software. And I had the idea that teaching some college classes in the evenings would be a really neat way for me to be able to have my foot in both of those worlds. And so I thought that having a graduate degree was going to be the way to get me moving on that path to be able to do that thing. So toward the end of getting my master's, my first daughter was born, my first kid, right? So that was the time where this idea of being at work all day and then at teaching classes in the evening became a lot less appealing. So that never did come to fruition, and I haven't I didn't really get the benefit that I intended out of the master's. So in my situation, I think that I had a motivation, but it wasn't really the way things worked out. Now, I did get a lot out of it, right? I mean, I learned a lot from taking those classes and interacting with the instructors and students, and I think it was a really good thing. I just don't think it was really worth the price tag that you have with tuition in schools. And at the same time, so I guess you kind of asked about kind of what I would advise, I guess, about somebody who's looking at these options of going to college, going to a boot camp, those kinds of things. And you made a really good point, Nick, about that the boot camps aren't necessarily accessible to somebody who has some financial obligations. And it really is. It kind of makes me think of like something like the Biggest Loser on TV, right? That these people are just going and fully dedicated to trying to shed weight and having no responsibilities all that time. And yeah, a lot of people in the real world, that's not really an option. So if that's not an option for you, then other things there. The other thing you asked about was if you've been a professional developer for a while, is it good or worthwhile to go back and get a degree? And to me, I think the things that you study in that degree are worth looking at. Right, reading an algorithms book, and learning what Big O notation is, and doing some of those things, I think is worthwhile. I think there are some really good resources for that now with YouTube and a lot of these different sources of free training and or paid content as well, right? Sites like Pluralsight that have that's more professional development kind of driven stuff rather than being more computer science stuff. Although there might be some more computer sciencey stuff there, but I think some of these resources that you can get on the internet versus the formal classroom setting are probably in a lot of ways just as good, certainly more cost effective, and in some ways maybe even better. So I think learning those things is good. But college isn't necessarily the best place to do that. It depends on the situation. It might be worthwhile for somebody, and especially if you've got an employer who's footing the bill, then why not? I mean, you are investing time in that thing, and I think in college, one of the things that really annoyed me as a working professional in college with a bunch of students was the emphasis of the students on, hey, I'm here to get a grade. And that drove me nuts because I was there trying to learn as much as I could about just the things that I need to know for being an awesome software professional and understanding the science behind some of the things going on. And every time that some new concept was introduced in classes and things like that, immediately somebody was asking, is this going to be on the test? and I just, that was, I mean, I guess that's kind of the way the world works, but it was an
Sorry, go ahead.
emphasis I didn't like at all.
That's something that I totally agree with you on. I feel like when you go into school, they're more focused on, like you said, with getting the grade, and I feel like you're rushed. Like, you don't, like with me, since I have 5 weeks to do something, and like for instance my assignment's due in week 1, right? I don't got time to sit there and look at the underlying stuff of anything. I just have time to go get a bare minimum information and do it, get it, and then pass. And it just really irritates me because I'm not really like absorbing anything unless I go on my own time and look at it. And that's why I feel like doing boot camps or anything like that, like Treehouse, like I did with Treehouse. I felt that, for one, there's not a ton of pressure upon you if you're gonna fail, and it also allows you to actually absorb what you're learning and go in depth on it without having to sit there and worry about if you're gonna pass or fail something, and just lose $1,000 class, and then that you have
Yeah.
to worry about all that. So that's something that's a giant benefactor with not going to college. But again, it just all depends on the type of college you go to, and whether or not you're fit for it.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And um, Kyle Simpson was on my podcast, right? I talked to him, and he's the head of curriculum for Maker Square, which is, in talking to him, I guess that thing would fall under the category of boot camps, but he really emphasized that what he's trying to accomplish there, and what they are trying to do, is to create quality professionals that are able to, not only get a job, which is kind of, a big part of the whole boot camp theme, is this whole, promises about getting a job and having, big salaries and all of that stuff. And he really talked about a focus on making sure that these professionals are learning the things that they need to be somebody who can really deliver value for their employers, and to create an ongoing relationship to where people are in kind of a lifelong learning mode, and that they have Maker Square as a resource to refresh their skills and stay up to date, and to kind of have this pyramid of value going back and forth. And it was really appealing. I think it's worth listening to his vision of education on that podcast. And I think that the one thing that you are kind of missing if you're not in some kind of classroom setting, whether it's a boot camp or a college, if you're just trying to go your own and learn from videos and that stuff, is really interaction with somebody who is skilled, both in the material as well as in teaching itself. And I think the mitigation for that is that there are a lot of communities out there where you can access people, and a lot of the things like what you guys are doing, right? Doing a podcast and just talking to people and picking their brains about stuff, and learning from people, and being able to have relationships where you can have some of those interactions, and bounce questions off people, and just converse, human interaction. I think you're getting a lot of the benefit that you would get from college anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that's what I kind of talked to you on your podcast about, being able to meet people and, like you said, ask all these questions and use that as an excuse to ask people questions.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what
Yeah.
I mean. I went to school. I have a master's degree. I don't know how much you know about me, Dave, but I have a master's degree in social work, and the benefit, I could have sat in a class and learned all day, but the most benefit I had, period, was going out and talking to people that are doing the social work.
Yeah.
I also have education degrees. I had more benefit from talking to teachers, because the textbook is one thing, and the textbook, I hate to say it, but the textbook lies. It makes
Yeah.
everything seem, in a perfect world, nothing, if everything, you had all the resources to you, you could do all this stuff. But in the real world, this is the way things work, I mean, even I think some of the resources that are out there, they assume the perfect world of being a developer. But when you talk to somebody that's actually, working as a developer, you realize there's a lot of other things you have to keep in mind. I mean, it's a lot of it is, doing the programming. A lot of the other stuff is actually being able to go out and talk to people, understand what the client's looking for, negotiate to get things done. And they don't teach that stuff at Treehouse, Code School, or probably many of these boot camps.
Totally.
No.
Yeah. So I think that's the benefit you get from talking to actual developers.
Well, it's also where I kind of think that by talking to other developers, that's also how I was able to find things like John Somers in his blog, and David in your stuff, as well in the finding out the book Soft Skills that John Somers wrote about. What Nick was saying about having the social skills to go out and meet people and be able to talk to people during interviews, and stuff that they just don't really teach. That just really comes with either experience or just reading about it to begin with, and then really figuring out how to implement it. But I think another thing that people get though is what Nick said is when you read a textbook, it sits there and tells you one thing, but when you go out in the real world, it's totally different. I also think people get this thing I want to start calling it textbook syndrome, where for instance, my stepmom, she's going to college for business management, and I was talking to her about something about an e-portfolio and managing your online presence. And from actively doing that, I learned kind of how to do it and how to meet other people, and she's going off. She wouldn't listen to anything I was saying because she was just going strictly off what the book said. And it's just you can't just always go off what the book's telling you to do, because you're just going to end up failing in the long run.
Well, and I had this same conversation, with Daryl Dixon the other day, which we interviewed before. But when you went off to grab lunch or whatever you were doing, we were on the chat. We were just talking, and I was expressing to him my frustration with, because I'm studying JavaScript right now, and and I'm sitting there and I'm just and I'm having trouble memorizing everything. And he's like, whoa, wait, you can't memorize JavaScript, but
Yeah.
And the thing is, with having 58 years of schooling, you're taught to do that. That is because there is you almost become conditioned to do things a certain way. So you sit down, you look at the book, you memorize it, and then you regurgitate it out, like a mother bird feeding a baby bird, and it doesn't work, But if you actually the more I sit down and actually try to work through the problem, and think about, okay, I don't need to memorize it. I need to think of how do I solve it, and then go out and find what I need because I know how to write the code. It's it's just that I need to figure out which ones, which part to do next. And in this past week, I've actually been able to do some of the algorithm stuff on Free Code Camp doing that. Now, granted, it's been hard. It's been frustrating. I've wanted to tear my computer apart at times, but I did it. Because I stopped trying to remember, what's that method I need? Just go out and look for it and find it, and I also feel like sometimes it's like I'm cheating. It's like, well, if I Google it, I really haven't shown that I've learned it. Well, no, Google's a tool that I actually have to use.
Yeah.
So it's changing your mindset, and I think that's maybe a lot of the problems that a lot of people run into. Maybe in my doing the same thing I'm doing, and that's something to get away from. So
yeah, I think that's a really good lesson for the business of building software products as well, right? So the idea that you're going to sit down before you start to build the thing and try to figure out what it is that it's supposed to do is a fallacy, right? The idea that you're going to kind of, in a waterfall style go and come up with all of the requirements for what this thing is supposed to do in a vacuum and then emerge, months or years later with, aha, here's my product, behold, come and use this thing. Well, you spent all that time building the wrong thing. So when you're trying to memorize all of JavaScript, you're going down some arcane paths and looking at some structures and some things and ways of trying to use the language that you're just not going to use. And that time that you spend trying to memorize all of that stuff is wasted time. And so when you go with the approach of, hey, I'm going to just start building this thing and figure out along the way what it's supposed to do, well, that's the same thing you're doing with languages, right? I'm going to use this language, this this platform, this tool, and as I come across something that I don't know, well, then, just in time learning, I'm going to go out there and figure that thing out. It's the same thing as incremental delivery when you're working with a team, or building a product on your own, or whatever that thing is, right? You figure out what you need to do in the moment, and then the next time you face that problem, well, you got that experience, and that's a really good way to incrementally build your knowledge, your skills, your career, in the same way that you incrementally build a product.
Yeah, and one thing that I was going to point out too is that's why when I go, like, for instance, on like Free Code Camp, where what Nick was saying, where you're constantly doing like algorithms and stuff. Well, that's good. That's great to practice, for problem solving. If that's all you're practicing 24/7, you're never going to actually get any knowledge of building an actual application. You're just going to have trivial knowledge. But like you said, if you're going out and just building a product, and then you go build another product and another product, you're going to run into different problems each time. And it's something that I found by doing what I've been doing, which I've been building a product after product after product. I ran into several issues, and it was interesting how much that the first product that I built, I solved that issue. So when I came down to the fifth product, all those other issues I ran into at one point were just like a gigantic manual of information that I can just go back through and just copy and paste back into my code, and then just keep moving forward without having to sit there and try to solve it.
Yeah, that's really. Oh yeah.
Good.
That's the kind of the idea to me of really why patterns is so interesting, right? For a while, design patterns kind of became all the rage, and everybody was talking about patterns and all of these named patterns, and are you applying this here? And people started naming their code, naming classes and things inside their code after patterns, and it was kind of this pendulum swing of being too focused on patterns, and then it was like, no, patterns is the wrong way to do it, and so kind of the pendulum swings away from that. But I think kind of the real the right place, I hate saying right, kind of a better place in my mind of using patterns is that exactly what you described there, Alex, is that I've seen this type of problem before, and I remember how I solved that thing. And yeah, maybe somebody has put a name to the approach, or maybe not, but it's recognizing those similarities in the different types of problems that we solve. And really, there aren't necessarily any new problems, really. They're just different faces on a lot of the same problems. And when you recognize the commonality there, well, then, hey, I can apply this lesson that I've learned in this other place. Just like Nick was talking about with social work and education and all of those things, right? You've learned a lot of valuable lessons there in those experiences, in actually getting out in the field and trying some of those things. And that made you a more complete person to be able to tackle the negotiation that is involved in software process, as well as kind of just the heads down coding, right? You've got some new insight, some new empathy from having had those experiences that somebody else may not have, and you're going to approach that problem a little bit differently, because all of these things kind of form your collective experience that give you a kind of a base for being able to kind of see something in there that you can recognize, and that you can apply something
Mm-hmm. Now another thing that I noticed too, with what you were saying of being able to recognize new things and build upon that. When I've talked to, before I started all this stuff with the podcast and everything, I've talked to other people that would go, that when they're trying to like look for a job, they don't feel they're ready to get into the job, because they feel like when they get into a production environment that they're just going to stare at like this gigantic code base and go, like they don't know JavaScript or no more, or whatever language they're in. And so they never, I would say they never actually try to apply, or they never, build an application themselves, because they don't feel that that's going to be sufficient enough to put out there. So with me personally, I just do it, and I've been putting in for applications galore, and I finally got a breakthrough this week and got an interview on Monday. But nice. For the thing I was going to ask you, for people that are stuck trying to apply, or afraid to apply, or have that imposter syndrome that they feel that they're not really a developer because, like Nick said, they're looking up on Google, which to us is just a tool now. What advice do you have to give to those people since you've been in it for a while now? I mean, I'm assuming you've gone through some of the ups and downs of, when you're learning, you don't feel ready, you feel ready, you don't know what you're doing, and then you finally figure it out.
So a lot of people have said about having children that if you wait until you're ready, you'll never do it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's really fear is paralyzing, right? I mean, it's a natural human instinct to feel fear, and it is a natural human response to hesitate because of it. And I think that's been a lot of the story of my life, is that I have missed out on a lot of wonderful opportunities to do a lot of great things because I didn't think that I was going to be able to handle it when I got there, or I didn't think that the person that I was going to submit this work to was going to approve of it, or I was afraid of the response, or things like that, right? And so it is natural, and it's hard, and that was certainly my experience, right? I got a job as a junior developer when I was much younger and starting my career, and I felt like I was a fraud, right? I felt like I was going to walk in there and like I mentioned before, I didn't know what a relational database was. There were a lot of things that I had to learn on the job, and I went in there as a junior person, and that was really the expectation, right? I was going to have a lot to learn on the job, but still at the same time, it was like, just paralyzed with fear that I'm going to be exposed for just not belonging, and not, that I shouldn't be here. And I think really the only way that we can deal with that is to just find a way to get through those butterflies that are there in your stomach, and of course it's more than just butterflies in your stomach, right? I mean it is a gripping anxiety about these things. And I mean, evolutionarily, that's the way we've been. The way that our species has evolved is that we have these protection mechanisms that keep us from doing dangerous things, and those things are triggered when we go into these situations where we feel uncomfortable. So my advice, I guess, as far as how to deal with that, is that you just got to deal with it. And that sounds like a cop-out, and it sounds stupid, right? But really, my mantra here in the past couple of years, as I've tried to redesign my life and become a little bit more of a social person, right? A little bit more of a community participant than really just being a geek that bangs on the keyboard and then goes home, right? My mantra now is punch fear in the face. And I usually add an extra word in there that it would probably make this interview inaccessible to kids if I threw that in there. So and I do want to make sure that that a general audience can hear the things I have to say, because I think that I've got my daughters started on writing code and some of those things, and I think that they're probably not to the point where they would be interested in listening to this conversation, but I don't know how far away that is. They may get there. And so anyway, that's a sidebar, but punch fear in the face is my mantra, and you've got to do things that are uncomfortable if you ever want to grow. So I guess that's my advice to those people is if you are doing something that makes you feel sweaty and anxious and like you are a fraud, well, that's probably exactly what you need to be doing.
Yeah, and I think I'm in that situation, not really feeling a fraud. I'm just in that situation now, being really nervous, with going into that interview on Monday. I would say just nervous in general, talking to recruiters. Waiting for that one question where you're just gonna have to flat out say I don't know because your skill base isn't there yet, or different things like that. But like you said, I look at it like you said, just do it. And if I fail, I fall flat on my face. I fall flat on my face. Who cares? There's always going to be that other chance that's going to come along. And the best thing I take out of it is that I have now been exposed to that specific situation, to where if it pops back up or something similar to it, I know how to handle it. So I think that's like the best way to happen is if you just continuously you're going to either succeed on your first couple tries, or you're just going to continuously fail until you figure it out to where you're eventually just going to succeed. And the only way I think that you're going to be exposed to that is if you just do it, like you said.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the biggest thing is just you just got to go out there and put yourself out in that situation.
And you talked about that question of, that you don't know the answer to, right? When you're in that interview, and we're all terrified of that, right? But as somebody who has done a lot of interviewing of candidates and hiring of developers, I know that when I am doing an interview and I come to a question that the person that I'm talking to that they don't know the answer to that thing, or usually my questions are a little more open-ended than having a right answer. But if it's something that they're just not familiar with and they don't know, I would much rather hear, you know what, I don't know, the honest answer, than to have somebody try to put a smoke screen up and trick me into thinking that they know something that they don't, because it's usually pretty easy to detect those, and it just makes you look a lot worse if you're trying to BS your way through something. So that, I think, is really good advice that you kind of hit on there a little bit, that hey, if you don't know, be honest about that. Now it might be advantageous to say, well, I don't really know, but I think I could, something along these lines, right? And you can kind of give a kind of a reasoned answer to kind of what you might think. But yeah, that honest answer is always to your benefit.
Yeah, it's something like I'd rather just tell them flat out no. If I don't know it, I'd rather just tell them I flat out don't know it, and then move on, and then obviously either just not get the job or whatever, and just move on and look up the answers, write the answers down, do something to go figure it out later on. That way you have that in your skill base.
Well, and
I think that's what.
Sorry about that. So I think that finding those answers is worthwhile, but at the same time, a lot of interviewers are just bad interviewers. And when we kind of go into this mode of here's the quiz show, and I'm going to try to stump you with these questions about whatever technology it is that I'm asking you, those typically aren't very indicative of whether a candidate is going to be good for a position. And yes, it very well may be an indication of something that you ought to know, but not necessarily. So I wouldn't put too much stock into the interview asked this, and therefore I must know it.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the questions I was asked, it was stuff that was kind of like I figured it's stuff that you should have known, or I should have known, or I felt I should have known. And it was stuff that I actually went and found out. I'm like, oh wait, I know what this does. It just I never heard the word, never heard it in that way. So, and it was something I have seen on another basic questionnaire that I've gotten emailed to, and so it's just something that I just had forgotten about, and I was like, all right, now I gotta kind of keep that in my mind. But like you said as well, you don't need to remember every single thing they're going to ask, because it's not going to be the same thing on the next interview.
Yeah.
It may be similar, but more than likely it's not going to run into the same issue. Now, so since you've been on hiring boards and everything like that too, I mean, like, do you have any advice on, like, when you do a face-to-face interview, how many interviews do you have that you've done, I guess, that like, or gone into, that do like I've heard like horror stories about the whiteboard challenges, or like you go into a junior developer position and they're asking stuff that it's like what, like that you would be expect from a senior level type thing, like, so like what's your advice on that?
Well, so I'd say that the whiteboard challenge has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit lately, and I've heard some people on podcasts saying that that's not a very good way to do interviews. That is something that I used to do quite a bit, was get people to write code on the board, and I still think that it's a fairly good. It's not ideal, right? And really the conversation of trying to decide whether somebody's going to fit on a team, whether they're going to admit when they don't know something, and whether they are going to voice their opinion even if they think that it might be wrong, then those are the things that I'm typically looking for. So if I ask you what do you think of test-driven development, and and I can tell that you're trying to tell me what I want to hear rather than what you really think, Yeah, I'm done. I don't need to
Yeah.
talk to you anymore. You're not for me, because I want somebody who is going to voice their opinion. So I would say that that's one piece of my advice there. Now, the whiteboard is something that I did use quite a bit when I was interviewing people, and I think looking back on it, I should have been a little more clear to the interview candidates about what I was looking for, because I did ask some kind of computer sciencey questions, that algorithms and stuff like that aren't really that applicable to the day-to-day work of a software developer in a business environment. So it was what I really wanted to see was how somebody approaches a problem, and if they draw a picture and try to think through the problem that they're trying to solve before they start writing code. And I want to see, can they code, right? And it's, if I'm hiring somebody to do a job writing software, well, are they able to just have basic core competency in creating flow of a program, and can they talk intelligently about inputs and outputs to a function and some of those things, right? You don't have to write perfect code. So I think my advice to somebody who walks into what seems like a high pressure situation, and I did have a little bit of a reputation for being kind of the tough guy in the interview, and I was usually the last, kind of the other people ahead of me would kind of weed out the candidates that were obviously bad, and then the people that were kind of getting through the screen would come to me for some of the more technical stuff. But yeah, I mean, really, my advice is don't sweat so much that you are getting every semicolon and all of those kinds of things, depending on what language it is you're writing on the board. Really, just try to demonstrate that you can think through a problem. Don't jump into code immediately. Do some asking of questions to make sure you understand the problem, which I think is really a big reason why I liked those computer sciencey questions, because either the people didn't have computer science degrees and weren't ever really exposed to these algorithms kinds of questions, or it was so long ago that they don't remember, right? So I want, if I say, hey, I want you to I don't even remember what it was, some data structures, do this, right? The first thing I want to see is, if you don't know what that means, are you going to ask me to clarify that? And that was really one of the things that I think tripped up a lot of candidates, was they tried to pretend that they knew something that they didn't know and went down paths that really hurt. So yeah, that's my advice. Ask questions, make sure you understand the problem, be slow to start writing code, and when you start writing code, just make sure that you are approaching a problem and not just geeking out on code.
Yeah, definitely. So now, when you mention like algorithms and things like that, so obviously you can't just memorize a bunch of random algorithms and then expect them to be in an interview. So when you go into these types of interviews, I mean, is there something that you should be like trying to practice for to begin with? I mean, or is it just completely off the wall random, where when you get there you either know it or you don't?
I don't think that the question should be so much what you know, and there are varying qualities. The quality varies among interviewers too. So right, you might just be dealing with somebody who's not very reasonable, right? I mean, there's as much variety in the quality of interviewers as there are of candidates. So they may not be thinking exactly like I'm thinking, but the point is not so much what you know. It's really, are you able to deal with problems, and are you going to clarify what it is that you're trying to do before you start digging into it? So to me, it's not a question of what are you going to study to prepare for the thing. It's really just getting comfortable with solving problems, and practicing that you are building some things that are real types of applications. And if you learn the lessons of how the pitfalls that you can fall into when you're building an application, well, those are the same pitfalls that you can fall into when you're in that coding exercise in an interview.
So now, and that's that. Yeah, I was gonna say that's some really good advice then, to rather just like try to practice problem solving in general just by building actual applications. And
yeah.
I feel like that's something I guess I was going to say then, I've been on the right path, and just by building like harder, what I've been doing is building harder and harder applications. Like I was saying, I've mentioned building just a basic text editor, code text editor in Electron. But by doing that, that also exposed me to some stuff that Electron offered. Just exposed me to using like certain things on the file system on the computer, and just different things like that that I never had to touch before, outside Java, obviously. So that was interesting to get into with that. But now another thing I was going to say is what is like I also heard this too. I don't know if this just depends on the company, on the type of company, how big the company. But I mean, I've heard stories of interviews like lasting like 6 to 8 hours, which I heard of at Google and like the huge huge Fortune 500 companies like Amazon and like Facebook. But like at like a smaller company, for instance, or like for instance even at GitHub when you did your stuff on there. I mean, like what's generally an interview length like? Like what's that like?
Well, I haven't ever. Well, actually, that's not true. I did do an interview at Amazon, so I did get exposed to a little something like that. And yeah, that experience was really multiple hours, multiple interviewers. Just one person after another. I think that is a minority of the kinds of experiences that you're going to run across, and most shops are going to be a lot smaller, and their people aren't going to want to spend that kind of time vetting out these candidates. And really, to me, if you haven't made up your mind in 45 minutes to an hour about whether you think this person is somebody that's going to be a fit for your company, then you're probably not going to. So I think that people who are putting you through that kind of stuff, and I've heard of like executive level positions really trying to make people uncomfortable and trying to make them interview through lunch and making them really into a high stress situation to see how they handle that. I don't think there are many people who are doing that to software developers, and if they are, well, shame on you for doing that. I think that if somebody's going to treat you that way, that's not a place you want to work anyway.
I've actually had an interview sort of. I mean, not a long hour-long interview. I mean, hours long. But I've had a CEO at one place I interviewed for, which I did not take the job because I don't work that way. But they tried the pressure type interview. So I go in and I'm talking to two people, and all of a sudden this woman runs through the door. And I'm sitting there, and already uncomfortable because it's an interview. And she starts firing off these questions at me, and I mean, I'm talking like one after another, pressured speech, trying to trip me up, and I answer all the questions, and then she introduces who she is, and I'm thinking, who is this person, because she never introduced herself until the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and, I actually got called back for a second interview. In the second interview, I walked in, talking about, once again, intimidation. And I walk in, and this is for a therapy job. And I come into this office, this boardroom kind of thing, and there's like 30 people around this table. And at that point, I'm getting interviewed by all 30 of them. And a few of them are, supervisors, people, higher ups. The rest of them are all the therapists that are going to be my coworkers. And I sit down, and, and I thankfully I'm not somebody that's intimidated too easily. I mean, Alex knows some of the stories I could tell, honestly, these kind of things don't bother me. But still, I mean, I could just see somebody walking into that room and just like collapsing, And for a therapy job, that's not what you need. Maybe CPS, which I've done. Yeah, maybe this kind of pressure, because if you can't handle that, you're probably not going to be able to handle being on a in a courtroom or being able to tell somebody, that you're taking their kid. But for a therapy job where you're going to talk one-on-one on it with a kid, probably not the thing you need. But I got the job offer, and I'm like, yeah, no thanks. I have a better offer. And
totally.
I didn't really like the way you handled this. Found out that the company also fired everybody about 6 months later. So, so because they lost their contract, which is, it might be the reason why is because of the way the company is ran. I don't know. But and I think I think the other side of this, that Alex, maybe because I know you don't have as much experience maybe doing interviews is that you also have to be in a position that you are not just being interviewed by them, you're
Yes.
interviewing them as well.
Well, see, like with
And
me, I don't mean to cut you off, but I was gonna say like my
no,
experience in interviews has just been at like basic, like retail
sure.
jobs where it's kind of like with them, you just that's why one thing I noticed is with what David said, where if you just tell them what you want to hear in this industry specifically, chances are they're just gonna hang up on you or just tell you whatever they want an actual opinion from you most of the time. To where in retail they don't want your opinion. They just want some guy that can just stand there and do what they're told 24/7 and not really give any value or anything to the company.
Well, you're a
Yeah.
replaceable cog. I mean, let's be honest. Nothing against anybody that's in retail, but that is, I honestly feel, I don't want to get political, but that a major corporation, you are a cog in a machine that if you're not working, they're just going to come in and fire you, and most likely they're going to get rid of you when they do a downsize, anyways.
Yeah.
So, uh, in a software development, environment, you bring a valuable asset to them. Even
Yeah.
if you don't have everything they need, number one, most likely they're going to teach you the way they want to have you doing their process anyways. Number two, they if you can show that you've learned one language, you could probably go in and learn Python pretty quick. You could probably go in and learn anything else. So that's not that can be taught to you because you're
Yeah.
showing you already have that skill to learn. But at the end of the day, what they're looking for is the unique qualities that you bring into this. But at the same time, you also have to look at, you don't want to go to just anywhere. You want to go, I think we were laughing, one of the shows we had before was, you don't want to be going to a company and be the only person doing web development because that's what they're looking to hire. And I've actually had one of these things where it was like, you were going to be doing the SEO, you're going to be doing the web design, web development. We also need you to do the some IT stuff on the side as well. There's actually a company locally here hiring in Maryland,
Yeah.
and that is not the job you want to get into.
Yeah.
So
I
do
had
first.
sorry, let me cut you off. I was gonna say I had a friend who at the time, one of the local casinos in our town, he got hired on as a PHP developer, right?
Mhm.
So he gets to the job, and the first thing they asked him to start doing when he first ever got there was like when the casino first opened type of thing, was to start transferring the entire code base over to PHP because they were running it in Cold Fusion. So he
Wow.
had, and then him and the team or whatever had to go figure out how to do that. So then on top of that, they were having him do what you were saying, doing like actual, like I would say tech IT jobs that weren't development, like working on like actual network servers and like doing what the network engineer should be doing, and just a bunch of other menial tasks that wasn't even in his job description that specifically should be held for someone that was qualified to do it. And they were paying him dirt wages to do it, and because just because they can, and a lot of the people at that place just end up quitting because of it. But it comes down to what you were saying is make sure, you guys were saying, just make sure you want to be in that environment, and I think that's the biggest thing when you're choosing a career path and you're going into an interview for a career, not just a general retail job that you're just going to put up with is, if you don't like the people you're talking to, and they offer you the job, just don't take it. I mean, it's not worth being miserable for the rest of your life working at that company. And the other thing I ran into, David, is I don't know if you kind of seen it happen in interviews or is where when you talk to an interview, it's kind of like they're trying to, like, sometimes they'll try to sell you their company, like, why you should work there, why it's so great, and then they'll tell you all this stuff that can happen, but when you actually get into the real job, it's just kind of like the mask comes off and they're like a totally different person, and it's just like everything they told you is a total lie.
Well, I'd
Like,
say that I mean that is really your job and their job is to sell you in the best light that respectively sell yourselves as in the best light that you can portray them. Now, if somebody
Mm-hmm.
is actually lying about things, well, that's abhorrent and a nasty thing, and I haven't really come across that. Now, I think people do tend to paint a rosy picture, but when you think about it, you're doing the same thing too, right? You're not going
Yeah.
to tell them about your warts and all of that kinds of stuff. So you need to go in there knowing that, yeah, it's nothing is ever as beautiful as it's portrayed to be, and
Mm-hmm.
if you're lucky, somebody will tell you honestly, here are some of the kinds of things that I don't like here, and some of that stuff. And I think that's a great question to ask somebody who is doing an interview: is how do you like working here, and what is the worst thing about working here? And
I
some of those
never
things
would
that
have
they
thought of
don't like.
actually, I was gonna say I never actually thought of asking them that. I'm gonna
Well,
actually
once
try to do
again, though,
that.
you are interviewing them because you know what? I mean, you might go to a company and it might be a great fit for me, but it might not be a great fit for you. It might be okay fit for Dave, But me, you, and Dave are all three going to have a very different opinion of what the environment we want is. Maybe it's all of the desks are standing desk and they play ping pong at like in the middle of the day or something. Personally, me, maybe I wouldn't like that. Maybe you would.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they are hard people to work for, and they're demanding, and they're telling, they're pushing you to drive. That might work for you, Alex. For me, I'm not going to be able to do that. It might just be as simple as one company gives you free coffee and they provide professional development, and that's what you're looking for at the beginning. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
another question you might want to ask them is, look, I'm new. I'm driven to be successful in this. How can you help me to be
A better
to
developer.
grow. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they might tell you, well, right, really, we're not able to do that right now. Right now, we're focused on doing this. They might be a great place for you to come back to later on in your career, but right now, maybe not a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
These are things, and companies are going to like the fact that you're asking that because number one, you are showing that you've done your homework. Ask them specific questions about stuff you see in their webpage.
Mm-hmm.
All of the interviews I've ever been to, I've researched the webpage. I went to Glassdoor, researched, looked at all the different things people have left, realizing that most people are going to leave negative ones because that's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
And looked up articles about them in the news and stuff, and asked them questions about stuff. If there was a bad article and stuff, I've asked them about it. Like, I saw this thing where I interviewed at a company that had lost their license at one point. Asked
Mm-hmm.
them, why did you lose your license? They explained it to me, and I was like, okay, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the biggest thing is to don't be afraid to ask questions, and it's something that in my other interviews I like people actually. One of them actually hired me because of me being able to ask as many questions I did because it was a group interview and like everybody was just afraid to ask anything.
Hmm.
So with me, I was just asking very specific questions to the job, but that was the main thing that they liked about it, and it's like what David was saying about being honest and about your skill level and different things like that. And
Well,
do what?
what it really comes down to is that you are trying to create a transaction that is going to benefit both sides of that, right? So if you agree that, hey, I want to work for you, and this company agrees that, hey, we want you to work for us, well, that only works out to the benefit of everyone involved if it is actually something that you derive benefit from and they derive benefit from as well. And being honest is really the best way to accomplish that. If a company,
Yeah.
you talked about a company lying to you and painting this rosy picture of how everything's wonderful when it was a lie, well, not only did they do something bad to you by doing that and misleading you and drawing you to a situation you didn't want to be in, but they also set themselves up for failure as well, right? They set themselves up to be in a situation where they hire somebody, get them in there long enough to spend some money on training them up and getting them ready to start rolling, and then this person's going to quit because of the bait and switch that this situation was not what they thought thought they were going into. So, when you're dishonest and when you are, trying to manipulate somebody into a relationship that they shouldn't be in, well, ultimately, that's going to hurt you in the end. So, I mean, it's really the same thing. You are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you, just like Nick said, right? And you have two responsibilities in this interview. One is to decide if that company is a place that you want to work, and two is to present yourself in a way that that they can find out if you're somebody that they want to work there. And that is really the art of the interview, is trying to decide. It's not a question of did you do well in the interview because you got the job or got the next interview. It's a question of, did you learn whether this is the right place for you to be and whether you are the right person to be there? And if if the answer to those is no, that either you're not the right person or that's not the right place, well, if you get the job, that's a failure, because really the intent of the interview is to figure out if there's a fit.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just to give an anecdote real quick. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I've been actually in a bait and switch interview as well, and I think this is something that will show you. I mean, basically, just to make the long story short, I took an interview. It was a presentation interview. That probably should have been the first indicator that there was a problem, and it was on a job that was going to be selling. It's an environmental a device that helps clean the environment in a home. Like the air and stuff. So, get in there, they pump you up, they're showing all this stuff, and then it ends up being a vacuum cleaner selling opportunity. And all these people wasted an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I was among the 30 people that stood up and walked out. And as Dave is saying, that was a wasted opportunity for all those people. If they would have just said on there, this is what you're going to be selling and so forth, those people would not have been there, wouldn't have wasted their time, and it would not have put that negative environment in the other people's heads, like, why are these people walking out? And it's so, if you don't feel comfortable even going to the place, don't even, apply to the place, because I think also people get into that thing where it's like, oh my God, I'm desperate. I'm going to apply to every single thing on Indeed that comes up for junior web developer. And I know people that have done that, and I've always been there in a couple of times where it's like, I don't really like this job just reading it, and I'm desperate, So, and then it's like, I don't want to go to this interview. That is not a good place to start. So.
Yeah, one thing though, to kind of move the conversation forward and kind of start wrapping things up. The last question I really want to ask David is, when you apply to all these jobs and you get these different recruiters, the biggest thing I noticed, and I've read an article about this somewhere, I can't remember, it's like one of the local companies out in Portland, Oregon. They made one of their recruitment teams made up like a fake development resume to see what other recruitment agencies are doing and how they are to perfect their own stuff. And the biggest thing that I agreed with was the fact that they don't read your resume, and some of them are just completely rude. So, as a new developer coming into this, I mean, what is your advice for dealing with recruiters? Since you now kind of just turn them down and tell them to go away, because I know you talked about them to where you just don't even deal with them no more.
Well, that's not completely true. I think in general, you're going to get, as a developer with any experience, you're going to get a lot of recruiters who are kind of doing these unsolicited, just reaching out and stuff like that. And when you think about it, they've got a job to do, and some recruiters are better than others. Some are really trying to help connect people who want jobs with employers who want people to do work for them, and there are others who are really just trying to make a buck by just getting somebody in a position. So there are varying degrees of what recruiters are worth, and so finding good ones, I guess, is kind of the hard thing there. I would say, as far as if you are dealing with recruiters, and I'm not saying don't, because I think there are a lot of good ones, and it's being a broker for a transaction is a worthy purpose. I tend not to want to go through recruiters because I typically, with the recruiter's cut, it's kind of hard to get the rates that I want, and I've gotten to a position where people typically approach me about stuff rather than having to go through recruiters, right? But I think that recruiters do serve a purpose, and especially as kind of a young junior guy, that they can be a valuable resource. I would say my advice would be you don't you don't necessarily need to avoid them, but as a young man in the world of software, recruiters tend to send out attractive females to appeal, to you, and be careful with that, right? Consider whether these people are actually giving you real, positions that are things that are in your best interests, or are they, are you thinking with the right part of your body? I guess is one thing that that's a. I'm going to be careful about the way I say this, but
I can back this up because I actually went to I live in Baltimore. And I went to this technically event. It's like a Tech Baltimore thing. I think Alex remembers when I went to that, and there was a lot of very gorgeous women walking around, chatting to people that they would probably have never chatted to. I'm just going to be honest. Why not? And they were, every single one of them were recruiters, and they were passing out cards. I saw a lot of hugs given. I saw a lot of people doing selfies with people. I mean, it was it happens. It's fun. You're talking to people, and but at the end of the day, they have a job. They have quotas to fill. Really, I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, make sure you're making a decision that's good for you and not being distracted into committing to something that's not best for you, I guess is the advice there. The other thing is get to know people. Right, going to user groups and things like that. Oh, and actually, Alex and I did talk about that a little bit. That that's not necessarily accessible to somebody living where you are, Alex. But the more that you can actually have interactions and talk to recruiters rather than just being what jobs do you have, and are you available and that kind of stuff. Actually having human interactions, you get a lot better picture of what recruiters are there really trying to get to know you and trying to find a position that's right for you versus just trying to fill some numbers. So I think real humans.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've been noticing now with recruitments in the past couple of weeks now is the difference in job boards too. I kind of went from Indeed to Dice at the same time, and I noticed with Indeed a lot of the recruitments on there honestly are quite garbage. They don't read your resume. Like you said, they just don't care. They're just looking to get another person in to fill their quota type of thing, rather than really looking into your interest in what you're looking for in a job. I noticed too, the ones on Indeed, a lot of them will just cold call me at 6:30 in the morning. And ask me a bunch of questions, have me fill stuff out, and then 10 seconds later call me back, say they read my resume, and then I'm not qualified. So it was that was kind of irritating at first, but when I noticed when I went to Indeed, it was this whole other site where before they even called me, they asked me very specific stuff and stated before we do anything, and I want to ask why you want to relocate, why you're looking for a job. Just to kind of get to know me a bit better, and then if they liked what I said, then they're for instance, the one I have on Monday, emailed me, said I read your resume, I want to talk to you. What is the best time that you can talk to me and so forth like that, versus just randomly just calling me up out of nowhere. They actually set up a time, tell me a little bit, they tell me who they are, and kind of what to expect, versus just randomly out of nowhere cold calling me and then putting me on the spot type of thing. So it's like you said, it just depends on who you get a hold of, and then figuring out whether or not they're really in there for your best interest type of thing, or they're just gonna be another random person that's just gonna lead you off onto some random place you don't need to be on.
Yeah, yeah, and if people don't treat you the way that you want to be treated, well, that's not somebody that you should be dealing with. And if people are calling you at 6:30 in the morning, well, you're on the West Coast, and they may not realize that it is 6:30 in the morning where you are. So maybe there's some room for if they make that mistake once that you could overlook it. But yeah,
They
if
keep doing it.
you've got to stand up for
Yeah.
yourself when people don't treat you the way that you
There
want to
was
be treated. And
Yeah, and I think me and Nick kind of have both experiences with that. Definitely, my first recruiter that ever called me, kind of similar to Nick, flat out told me that I'm pretty much never going to get a job in the industry, and that because I have like no experience working at a real place, and that pretty much I'm just pretty much destined to fail. And I was like, whatever. I pretty much hung up on the guy. And I was like, all right, that was kind of a total waste of time. And then Nick kind of had a similar story, but it just like you said, if you don't like the way you're being treated, my thing is there's a dime a dozen recruiters that eventually are going to call you over time. So I mean, I'm not afraid to tell somebody to just hang up or whatever if they're just treating me like trash, because it's not worth putting up with. It's not worth trying to get a job with them either. It's if that company's hiring them out, it makes you wonder what the company's like.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Other thing too. But yeah. So, Nick, do you have any other questions you want to ask David?
I mean, we've covered a lot of stuff. I mean, I know, myself. I mean, I'm trying to learn on top of actually working like full time plus, and it's been frustrating. I don't know if you have any advice for somebody that's trying to learn on the side while, going through. I don't want to say the word. We're trying to keep this show user friendly, but the nether regions, I guess. But I mean, that's I honestly, I'm trying to stay motivated with it and everything. And I was telling Alex beforehand. Sometimes I feel like I don't have what it takes. That's probably more the stress than anything else. Talking. Uh, what do you think? I mean, what would be your advice on trying to learn? I think I understand the language well enough, or at least can figure it out as I go. But learning that, like the breaking down, problems that actually make it. Because I feel like I get really intimidated by, like, right now I'm trying to just do a to-do list app. I mean, I understand all the language that would go into it, but to me, I just cannot figure out where to start half the time. So.
Well, I think the first thing to say is to acknowledge that yes, it's hard and it takes time to learn, and time is a limited resource. And when you have a full-time job, and then on top of that, you're trying to spend time with software and the other things that matter in your life, yeah, it's not easy to make time for all of that. So, that's the first thing is that's not a problem that I have solved either, right? It's
Yeah.
hard. I've got things on my list of things that I want to learn that I just I've been putting off for months because I just can't get to them. So I don't think that really gets easier. And I guess the first piece of advice that I would have is don't sacrifice your health for it. It's not worth it. Right? So make sure that you are still taking care of yourself, and make sure that you're still doing things that you enjoy. And Alex talks about John Sonmez, right? That he's been kind of this big, hard-charging guy for years and years, and he's kind of been on this, don't watch TV and don't do all this stuff. And I think he's got a lot of really good points there about TV. There's really not much on TV that's worth watching. But at the same time, if you really get enjoyment out of watching Family Guy, right, make some time for yourself to make sure that you are, recharging your batteries and do some of those things, right? And when you have families and things like that, make sure that those things take priority, because ultimately, your life is about more than just software and about learning new languages and stuff like that. So I guess the one thing that I have is don't stress about it, and easier said than done, right? Because I'm the same way. I lament the time that I have not learned new things and a lot of those kinds of things. So I don't have an easy answer, because I feel exactly the same way. There are a lot of things that I want to do that there's just not time for, and that's kind of the unfortunate reality of the opportunity cost, that you can't do everything, and we've just got to come to terms with that, really.
I would also say to people that are like kind of Nick in your guys' situation, or like in any situation really, I notice certain people that not like, or like for instance with Nick too, like I don't know like now, but at first like Nick, you kind of gauged where I'm at, and then kind of got disappointed because you feel like you should be at where I'm at type of thing, but then you also kind of sit back again and look at how much time I have to sit there all day long and do that, because again I don't have a family that I have to worry about. I don't have anything. I just sit all day long and practice code. But on the other hand, I still have to take a break. I still need to go play video games or watch TV or whatever, because eventually I'm going to end up burning out. And it's something I've been running into this last week, is just doing double the code on top of school and my own projects. And it's something like what David was saying, is just do something else during the day sometime, and or during the weekend or whatever you can. But I was gonna say is, I would say like that's something I feel like you kind of got discouraged of, because like I said, at one point you were able to spend as much time as you needed at one point, going through the courses on Treehouse and going through stuff with me, and then this gigantic workload got thrown on you and you kind of got discouraged at it. But
yeah, I think that's kind of where everything fell apart. I mean, at this point I'm working 12, 13-hour days, and it's on top of what I do for a living. I'm a clinician at a group home for boys, so
wow.
It's a rough job. So so I try to enjoy. I enjoy coding, but at the same time, it's like when I get home, it's you don't have the brain power left to try to understand something. You're looking at like a coding problem. It's like I have no idea what I'm doing. Most of the time I do. If I'm able to sit down and actually just think about it and get that, I'm actually able to figure it out. I was very excited when I figured out, I can't even remember what the problem was the other day. Very simple problem, but for a week there, I wasn't able to figure it out, and then I was just able to piece it together because I focused on it. So it kind of gave me that hope again that maybe it's not wasted, So.
Well, yeah. I think the other thing that's good to have though is have that support from other people, not just your family, but your friends or whatever. Like how I'm keeping you from just essentially just giving up type of thing. Like like refusing to hear you just sit there and say I quit, and not letting you do that. So I think that's another big thing to have if you're starting out or you have very limited time, is just to keep somebody in your corner type of thing to keep you going. Even if it's just doing small amounts of stuff, something that's just going to keep your mind refreshed on what you're doing. That way, when you have time to pick it, the bigger chunk up, you're still going. You're still able to keep moving forward. Yeah. I think that's the other biggest thing.
Right. Well, and that kind of work day, those 12, 13-hour days, not only is that not really a sustainable pace, right? I mean, that's obvious, but it's also counterproductive, right? When you work that much, every hour of work, you're getting less done per hour, right?
Oh, and so trust me. It's and the problem with my job is, like it's a group home, so they live there, and it's just like it ends up being that one chaotic crisis after another will happen, and the next thing you know, it's 12 hours, 13 hours. I know, like I've had messages from Alex where I'm like, now I'm still at work, and it's like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. I've got there 9 o'clock in the morning, and it feels like I've got nothing done. It's mostly just me with people talking, solving one crisis after another, and after a while, you start thinking, am I making the right choices here? Because it isn't sustainable. Stress will kill you. And I mean, I know that I'm a social worker, but it is not, work-life balance is not there, and something that I've brought up on the show before, because it is something that's kind of embedded into social work as much as social workers don't get to try to do it, is self-care. Doing something for yourself to make sure you don't burn out, because you're not able, it's like almost like you give yourself enough of yourself after a while. There's nothing left of yourself, and everybody else has it. You have to be able to recharge. So it is a rough, I hear what you're saying. There is not enough time. There's, so I don't have the answer to it myself either at this point. I wish I did. So.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like the first thing you need to do is get out of that situation where you're putting in those kind of hours.
Yeah, it's probably a very good point. You know, it's you know, that's the hard problem. I've told
Yeah.
Alex in the beginning, like if I could find a job working in programming with the knowledge I have now, I could probably at that point catch up. But then it's the paradox of I don't have enough knowledge at this point to show that I can do it. It's that catch-22 kind of thing. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. The demands of needing money and all of that stuff, it makes it really hard. So yeah, I mean, to me though, I always come back to that if it's fear that is holding you back from doing what you want to do,
Hmm.
it's easier said than done to say, hey, trust that it's going to work out. But I think that things tend to go better in my life when I throw caution to the wind and I just go for what I want rather than you think about being a podcaster and what I've done and how hard it was for me to get over that hurdle of asking just awesome developers, celebrities in the world of programming, to ask them to have a conversation with me, and the anxiety that I had doing those kinds of things. And when I finally just said, "Hey, this is the right thing for me to do, and I'm going to do it," it worked out. So I think it's often fear based, and I'm speaking like I know your situation a lot better than I do, and I apologize for that, Nick. I may not be talking directly to you. I may be
No, no,
talking
you're
more
fine.
abstractly, but
Yeah.
I think that things tend to work out when you let the fear go and just go for what you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
One thing.
I think at some point, because I think there's almost like that because we've been talking about interviewing and stuff, but there is that point where I think I was reading on somebody's blog about having these friends that are like amazing, amazing coders, but they have no, they do know how to overcome that fear of the interview. It's almost like one of those the graphs where you've got the this here going up. I can't think of the math right now, but and where the line meets. Amazing coder, horrible skills for interviewing, and then great skills for interviewing, kind of sucky coder. And
I,
but they're able
Yeah.
to
well,
overcome that interview because they have the people skills. So I kind of hold on to that hope because right now
well,
I'm a
there's a
horrible
thing.
coder.
Well, there's,
So
well, I mean, like, there's obviously too. There's also a balance. I mean, you can be a good
yeah,
coder and
yeah,
be awesome at interviewing. I mean, I'm kind of in between. Like, I'm not, god tier, programming, but I'm also not a god tier at interviewing.
hmm,
But the only way you're gonna get there is like what David's been saying, and just say screw it and do it anyway. And then if you fail, you fail. You learn how to you learn how to fix it. That's the biggest
yeah,
thing of what you did wrong. You analyze what you could have said better or done something different, and just keep
yeah,
trying. And that method of keep trying, and just eventually something's gonna come through, and you're eventually just gonna get the job. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And but like what David was saying of just throwing fear period away, I think is the biggest thing to start doing, is because like you said, you like I noticed like when you start a project, you're afraid to start the project because you don't know where to start after I've explained it to you before, or or I'll explain it to you and you forget, and then you kind of like still don't really try to figure out yourself type of thing because
I
you're
think
afraid to
that
fail
ends
at
up.
it or not get it done.
Yeah, I think that ends up with the anxiety, and so I mean, which of course I understand the anxiety and the way stress works. I mean, I think that's a stress response. It's
Yeah.
at some point you become just like what Dave was saying. You could be fearful, with the podcast and not ask these people because what are they going to do? They're going to turn me down. I've been in that situation before because I had the radio show, and kind of the same thing. At the first, I'm like, I'm not going to ask these people because I had a paranormal talk radio show, just so Dave knows what I'm talking about. And eventually, I'm just like, you know what? My hero in this was Art Bell. Art Bell interviewed all these people. Heck with it, I'm going to ask them, and honestly, almost every single one of them said yes because you know what? In the day, they're all people, and they all enjoy talking about the things they enjoy talking about. That's why they do it, and you once you realize that, that they are all just people and they all enjoy what they're doing and they want to talk about it with other people because that's what you do when you
I
enjoy
would also
things.
tell
This is the
people.
same
I would also
thing.
tell people that are trying to like get people on podcasts is don't ignore their title or what they do, because that doesn't mean nothing when you're asking them. I mean, like, I think that's the other thing that they get really a fear of. Like, for instance, like with me being a like really junior developer, and then I hear someone like David that's working on the Atom project for GitHub. You know, like they get that fear of like, oh, this guy's not even gonna, you know, remotely answer my questions, or he's just gonna like put me off, or whatever the case is gonna be. Even if he does, even if someone does that, who cares? You just go ask the next person. I think that's another thing John Summers talked about in his soft skills book about getting Uncle Bob Martin to do a annotation or whatever it is called, where they in his book, where he asked him over and over and over again until he said yes. He just did it in different ways. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just eventually you just got to learn to throw fear away. Is the biggest thing to take out of this before we kind of trail on even longer than we have. But
yeah, I was gonna say we've went a long time.
But I mean, I was gonna say overall though, David, do you have any final things you kind of want to mention, or?
No, I think thanks for inviting me to come on here and to have this conversation. I didn't really know where it was going to go, but I think hey, we've talked a lot about a lot of things that I think are going to be pretty useful especially to young developers who are trying to get their foot in the door. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity, for sharing, and not much else.
And then,
we never know where it's going to go either. So.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was saying at the beginning of everything, is I kind of like to just lead off with general questions and then kind of narrow it down to more specific stuff. Once it goes on there, I just feel like making it more free flow and stuff. And I figured with the experience you've had, I thought it'd be great to talk about what we did. And I think you gave us a lot of really great advice that other people should really take and start applying to their own selves. And really, hopefully it starts to help them out later on. But yeah. I was gonna say, like I said, it was great having you on. Definitely one time, eventually, like to have you come back on sometime later on, see where you've been at and see how you've been doing and everything like that. And
sure, yeah, there. talking about code and life and punching fear in the face. Yeah, I'm always up for that stuff.
You need to make that a quote. Like, pretty awesome. Just punch fear in the face. Like, I never heard it stated like that. That was just an awesome thing to put on there. But yeah. All right. Well, as always, guys, thanks for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed David's. Losing track of what I'm saying here. David's advice. And hopefully you guys learned something from it. And as always, I am Alex Gortney.
And I'm Dave Rail. I'm Dave Rail.
That's okay. Sorry. We always mess it up.
I missed my cue.
I didn't know if I was supposed to go. You're supposed to go. Who knows?
So. Right. Anyway, like I said, I'm Alex Gortney. Let's try this again.
Am I next?
Nick Queen.
And I'm Dave Rail.
There we go.
All right. And again, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys later.
All right.